I, 42, male, got married to my wife 5 years ago. For both of us, it was our second marriage. I have no kids from my first marriage, but my wife had a daughter. When I first met my wife, my stepdaughter was 16 years old. Now, even though I don't have any kids of my own, I understand that teenagers are moody and have a mind of their own. And obviously, I did not expect her to warm up to me right away. At first, when we started dating, I never really saw her much because she was busy with high school and her cheer practices and whatnot. But the few times I did see her, she was always kind of cold and didn't really seem to be interested in getting to know me or forming any kind of relationship with me. At first, I thought that, she's just shy and she would eventually warm up to me. But even after I had dated my wife for around a year, things were still the same. But by that time, I had got to know a lot more about my wife's previous relationship with the father of my stepdaughter, and it was not really pretty. I'm not really going to get into it in detail, but let's just say that her father was not the best person. He cheated on my wife multiple times before she finally decided to walk out of that relationship. At first, she didn't want to tell my stepdaughter about anything because she was still pretty young, and it was not appropriate for her to know about such grown up business. And my stepdaughter did not really take the divorce very well. Naturally, she adored her father and obviously didn't know what kind of person he was. She just knew him as her father, and she was incredibly angry at her mother for the divorce. The way things turned out, my wife ended up having sole custody of her daughter because her ex husband decided to move abroad and did not want to be in any part of the child's life. My stepdaughter was around 8 years old at the time and did not really understand what was going on, and she blamed her mother for separating her from her dad. Even though my wife had sole custody, her ex husband still had visitation rights, but he was never regular and more often than not did not show up for visits. All of these little things resulted in things turning pretty sour between my wife and my stepdaughter, to the point where they would have regular fights and she would threaten to run away from home while she was in high school. I gradually found out about all of this throughout the first year of dating, and so I thought that I should obviously go easy on the kid, and I understood that she was not ready to have another father figure in our life. I was also the first guy she dated seriously after her divorce and brought home, and so I was the first and only guy my stepdaughter saw with her mom after the divorce. Well, my wife and I got married around 2 years of us dating, and let's just say that the kid was never really happy with our relationship, even though I tried my best to have a good relationship with her. She was always cold and often pretty nasty to me, saying stuff like, I'll never be her real father, and once her dad came back, she would never talk to me or her mom ever again. It was pretty hurtful, but I tried to overlook it as much as I could because I loved my wife and would do anything for her. And somewhere in my heart, I had hoped that the kid would eventually come around. But when my stepdaughter turned 19, her bio dad moved back to the States and reached out to her. My stepdaughter decided that now that her dad was back, she didn't need her mom anymore and said that she would never come back home again. At that point, she had moved out for college anyway and hardly ever came back home. My wife and I didn't take her very seriously and knew that the man would disappoint her again sooner or later, and she would come back. But before we knew it, we had almost no contact with her for almost a year. My wife reached out to the kid multiple times, but she would not return any calls or texts. And once we even drove out to her college trying to get a hold of her, but she refused to see us, saying that she was happy with her dad. My wife was heartbroken. She even tried to talk with her ex and convince him to talk to her and make her see some sense. But he brushed us off, saying that it's not his problem and that it's not like their daughter was living with him, So there's nothing he could do. A dead end as expected. So that's how things were for a year or so, and we were already losing hope about reconciling. Things got worse when my stepdaughter called home one day to say that she had gotten engaged to her boyfriend and was going to drop out of college to support him while he builds his business. This was quite shocking. Despite being a total brat for as long as I've known her, the kid has always been a great student and had gotten a full scholarship to college and wanted to become an architect. The fact that she apparently got engaged was even wilder than dropping out of college to me personally. My wife tried her best to convince the kid to rethink. She somehow convinced her to come home with the guy at least once. When we saw the guy, we were taken aback, to say the least. He was arrogant and rude. Not to mention his business plan seemed to me like nothing more than complete foolishness. I couldn't imagine what the girl saw in him. After dinner, my wife asked to speak to the kid in private, so I took the kid out to the garage to have some beers. I asked him if he was the one who asked her to drop out of college, and he just shrugged and said that he didn't. And even if he did, it was none of my business, and that she's an adult and can do whatever she wanted. And it's not like I was paying for her education. Pretty snarky reaction for a reasonable question, in my opinion, but whatever. We probably hardly spent half an hour when my stepdaughter barged in and said that they were leaving, and it was a mistake to even come home. They left before I had a chance to say anything. I rushed to my wife, and she was very upset, like any rational parent. She had tried to talk to her daughter about thinking and taking some time out before taking such drastic steps for a guy she had known hardly for a year. But she lashed out and said a bunch of horrible stuff like my wife had no right to say anything because she didn't pay a penny for tuition. Like I mentioned, the kid had gotten a full scholarship and had no idea what a good wife was supposed to be like. This hurt my wife deeply as a victim of abuse. After that incident, we decided to cut off contact until she apologized, which of course was expecting a lot. My wife was still hopeful, though, that they would reconcile sooner or later. I supported her even though I wasn't very hopeful about that happening. But no one could see what was about to come. 6 months ago, I was at work when my worst nightmare came true. It was a cold day. We had been receiving a lot of snow. My wife was driving back from work, and the snow had made the roads really dangerous. It still feels like a bad dream as I write this. The car skidded on a particularly icy turn and crashed into another vehicle. She died on impact. The absolute devastation I went through cannot be described in words. She was and always will be the love of my life, and I still cannot imagine spending my life without her. I miss her every single day. After the initial shock, I realized that I'd have to be the one to break the news to my stepdaughter. I couldn't imagine giving such news over text, so I called her again and again, but as usual, she wouldn't pick up. I texted her saying it was an emergency about her mom, and even then she wouldn't get back to me, so I did the only thing I could. I reached out to my wife's ex-husband. I told him what happened and asked him to make the kid call me back immediately. Sure enough, I got a call back in less than half an hour. I broke the news and there was just silence on the other end. I was terrified, but after a few moments, she said she was on her way home. She was there for the cremation and memorial, but hardly spoke a word to me. Before leaving, she told me that I was no one to her now, that her mother wasn't there anymore, and asked me not to contact her again. Foolish of me to think this horrific event could finally make her be kinder, I guess. Well, my wife left some of her savings to the kid, but left the house to me. I didn't know that I would be getting the house before our lawyer broke the news to me, and I asked her to tell my daughter as well, because it's clear that any communication from my end was not desired. I was told she reacted angrily to the news and said some not so kind stuff about her mom. Honestly, it baffles me how a person this young can be so full of anger about something, but again, not my business. It has been around 8 months since my wife passed, and I'm still getting used to not having her around. I decided to turn our house into an Airbnb. It's a beautiful property decorated by her, but I just have only recently started to get back to my normal life without her and have had no contact with my stepdaughter ever since. Honestly, I kind of expected to never see her or hear from her ever again. So imagine my surprise when I opened the door yesterday and saw her standing there. It was Sunday, so I was having a lazy day by myself. I wasn't expecting anyone, let alone her, of all people. It took me a moment to get over my initial shock. She looked quite different. She had bright red hair. She is a natural blonde like my wife, and had cut it quite short. Quite a change from her longish curly hair I've seen as long as I've known her. I invited her in and we went and sat in the living room while I waited for her to say something about why she had shown up. After an uncomfortable silence, when I realized she didn't look like she would say anything, I initiated some small talk only to get a one-word reply from her. I gave up and finally asked her what she was doing there, and that if she was looking for any of her things, she wouldn't find them because I had gotten rid of everything after my wife passed away. I want to clarify that when my stepdaughter first moved out, she took almost everything worth taking and told us to throw away the rest. My wife couldn't bring herself to do that, but after she was gone, all that junk just annoyed me, so I donated whatever I could and threw away the rest. She said that she didn't care about any of that stuff and was here for a different reason. I asked her to go on, and she said that she needed a place to live because she had divorced her husband and her dad had apparently moved out of his old place and wouldn't pick up her calls anymore, so she didn't know where he was or how to reach him. Apparently, all this was because he was dating some 22-year-old. Now, this was a lot to take in. Last time I saw her was when my wife passed away, and from the very brief conversation we had, it seemed like they were still together. I didn't know that she had even gotten married, let alone gotten divorced. I asked her when all that happened, and she said that they had gotten married in Vegas before her mom passed away, and she had filed for divorce and moved out because she had fallen out of love with him and was seeing someone else. I was baffled. Who even was this person? Before I could say anything, she said that whatever was happening in her life was her business, and she didn't need my advice. She said that we should just have a civil relationship, and she would like to move in as soon as possible because she had been staying at a friend's place and needed to leave soon. I told her that it became my business when she demanded to live in my house with some random guy. I kind of lost my temper at her attitude and told her that she could just live with her new boyfriend or whoever she was with, since that's what she preferred to do, despite her mom wanting nothing more than all three of us being a family together. This seemed to really trigger her, and she became really angry and started to say stuff like I was emotionally abusing her by saying those things, and that I was behaving just like her dad because he apparently refused to even talk to her, let alone offer his place. So that's when it all clicked. She was here to try to have a civil relationship with me, not because she had a change of heart or anything. She just had nowhere to go, and her deadbeat dad had abandoned her once again. That made more sense. I mean, what can we even expect from a guy who cheated on his pregnant wife and abandoned his own family? Expecting something else from him is stupidity, and my wife and I had tried to warn the kids so many times not to trust him, but she was too arrogant to listen to us. Anyway, I'll stop rambling now. When my stepdaughter told me about the thing with her dad, I could not help but say that she should have seen it coming from a man who caused her own mother so much grief. She said that she thought her mom was making up all that stuff about her dad to make her like me. I told her what my wife and I have repeated throughout the entirety of our relationship. She didn't have to see me as her dad or even like me, but that has nothing to do with the truth about who her bio father is and what he did. But now I know that there's no point in saying all this, so I just told her that we don't have to revisit the past. I told her that I was not really comfortable with her and her husband living in the house, but wouldn't mind letting her stay for a few months till they found a more permanent solution if they agreed to pay rent and stay in the basement. I gave her a week to decide what she wanted. She became totally enraged at that. She said that this was her mother's house and I was no one to deny her from living there, and that I was the one who should pay rent to her because it is rightfully her house and I shouldn't be living there now that her mom isn't here anymore. I kind of expected this tantrum, so I remained calm and told her that although, yes, it was her mom's house when she was with us, she left it only to me and that I have all the rights to ask for rent if I wanted to. I told her that it wasn't my fault that she dropped out of college and I wasn't responsible for her and had no obligations to give her a place to stay since she has clearly established over the years that I am not her father. I told her she and her new boyfriend should get a job and use the money her mom left her to put down a deposit for an apartment. She screamed at me, saying that they already spent that money and their jobs didn't pay well enough for rent. I maintained my composure and just told her that I had made my terms clear, and that if she didn't agree, then she wasn't welcome in my home. She left in a rage, saying I'm a terrible person and I'm being vindictive for no reason. She said that she has a right over the house and she grew up in it and that she will sue me for it. I told her that she's free to do whatever she wants and that I'll send her a copy of the will to make things easier. I'm confident about the will and I'm sure I won't lose even if we go to court. Not to mention that there's no way those two can even afford a lawyer. It's just her being stubborn. I firmly believe that I am in the right here. I think the kid needs to learn how to take some responsibility for her actions. I still haven't, and I don't think I ever will, forgive her for how she treated her mother, and she still shows no remorse about that. I suggested a minimal rent amount that is easily affordable, even at minimum wage for two people, and so I don't think there is any reason to call me greedy. I don't need money, let alone from a bunch of stupid kids. I was feeling pretty confident about my decision, but then my brother and his wife happened to visit me that same day, and I ended up talking to them about this, and he seemed to think I was being too harsh and should just let my stepdaughter move in and live here rent-free. He says that I shouldn't be so hard on her because of her actions towards me in the past. His view is that she's young and practically an orphan, and it's my responsibility to help her. His wife, on the other hand, thinks I made the right call, and that she deserves this. So now I'm just confused and would really appreciate some outside advice. AITA for not wanting to let my stepdaughter move in with me despite her treating me terribly for years. Update 1. I've gotten a lot of responses about my posts and people seem to be very divided, but let me clarify a few things first that are being repeatedly brought up. I did not in any way influence my late wife into giving up the house to me. I had my own place before getting married, and we both decided that it made sense to sell my place for me to move into this house because it's larger and needed some renovations that we paid from the money we got from my old place. We both had our separate bank accounts and a combined one. All the money from my wife's personal account went to my stepdaughter. Every cent. It wasn't some exorbitant amount, but if you ask me, $50,000 is more than enough for the kid to get her things in order. I don't know where she spent it, and honestly, I don't want to know either. As for those of you saying I should show more concern about why she has been acting out and stuff, I can only say that I have had enough of doing everything in her terms and walking on eggshells hoping she will let me be a part of her life. I did enough of that when my wife was alive, and the kid made it clear that she didn't want me in her life. Also, my house isn't very big. We have 3 bedrooms. I turned the kid's old bedroom into an office years ago, and I wasn't comfortable renting out the spare bedroom because my brother is often in town for work and uses it whenever he's here, so I'd like to keep that room available for him. I don't live in some sort of palace with a million rooms, so the basement is the only option. It's furnished and spacious. I would never make anyone pay money for some nasty dump, let alone my stepdaughter. We might have a complicated relationship, but I do care for her, and I think she needs to be taught some financial responsibility if she insists on not continuing her education. That is actually why I'm even thinking about charging her rent. I obviously don't care about getting a couple of $100 from my own stepdaughter, but she needs to understand that she can't just do whatever she wants with no repercussions. I also had doubts about her so-called boyfriend. I wish I could answer them, but I've never met the guy and don't know anything about him except that he's a sales associate at some store. Also, I don't want him in my house. I don't condone cheating. And the fact is that she cheated on her ex-husband to be with this guy, and that's not something I want to encourage. Again, I have no intention of building any sort of relationship with either of them, and so I don't want any questions. I've spoken to my wife's lawyer to make sure that there are no loopholes in the will that my stepdaughter can use to claim the house. It is mine, without a doubt. There's nothing she could use to challenge it. As I've said, don't think she can even afford a lawyer in the first place, though, but it's nice knowing that it won't even be a possibility. And at the end of the day, after almost a decade of this kid treating me like I'm some sort of a terrible person, I don't think that I owe anything to her. I've tried countless times to be the bigger person, cut her some slack, but she has been cold from the very beginning. There is no doubt in my mind that she is only putting up this show to make amends because she is in financial trouble and just wants to use me as a cash cow. I think I have a right to not let her in my life. Update 2. It has been a crazy week, so after writing my last update, I contacted my stepdaughter to ask her if she made her decision or not, and she angrily told me that she would not ever pay rent for living in her own house and doesn't care that I'm the owner because she was sure I had manipulated her mom into leaving the house to me. I didn't want to get into an unnecessary argument, so I just told her that I'm glad she made her decision. The next day, I had to leave for a business trip for 2 days. I locked up the house as usual and left at around 8 in the morning. I finished the first day of meetings and decided to check my home security camera. I knew things would be fine because I had alarms in place in case anyone tried to break in, but I was bored and had nothing else to do. Guess what I saw in the footage? Around 12 in the afternoon, my stepdaughter and her new boyfriend entered the house with a couple of suitcases. They did some back and forth and got more stuff in. I was baffled. I'll admit that the passcode was not very strong and I have no idea how long it has been used. It's my wedding anniversary, but we live in a very safe neighborhood and luckily we almost never get crimes, such as break-ins. I didn't know what to do. At first, I was so angry at this girl's audacity that I thought of calling the police, but then I thought it might be better to call her first and talk to her. So I tried to do that, but found out that she blocked me and I didn't have her husband's number. I called the home phone and no one answered, but I expected that. I thought of asking a neighbor to check in, but then decided against that because I didn't want to bother anyone. I tried her phone one last time, but obviously that didn't work. I got angrier the more I thought about that, and so I did the only thing I thought I could do. I decided to call the police on them. Then I spoke with my boss to let him know that I might be late to the next day's meetings and explained the situation a bit. Good thing he's a reasonable man and told me that it was all right. I checked out of my hotel and drove. It took around 4 hours of driving, and it was past midnight, but at least I made it. I called the police a bit before reaching and told them the truth. My stepdaughter had illegally broken into my home with her boyfriend. I waited for the cops to arrive, and long story short, they kicked them out. A lot of screaming and ridiculous accusations were involved, and my neighbors gathered around my house. The cops had to talk her down and asked me if I wanted to press charges. I had no interest in doing that. I just wanted to get my house back to myself. I told her that there was no need to make it more complicated and that she should just leave without creating a bigger scene. They did leave, but she threatened to sue me and said meaningless stuff like I'll regret treating her this way. I'm sure none of that actually means anything, though. Anyway, I immediately changed the passcode after things had settled down and made a note to talk to my lawyer to see if there was anything else I could do to keep her away from myself and the house, and took a nap before driving back for my meetings. My lawyer suggested a restraining order, but I don't think that would be necessary. I will look into that if she does something again, but I think for now we're good. I wish my wife was here so I didn't have to deal with this thing in the first place. But well, I guess that's neither here nor there. Update 3. I know it has been a few months since my last update, but if anyone is still reading, I have a little update for you guys. So my stepdaughter reached out to me again. She texted me asking if we could talk, and so I called her. She said that she was sorry about entering the house without my permission and that she had decided to break up with her boyfriend. I won't get into the details, but she spent the money left to her by her mom to pay off that guy's debt, and he was the one who was forcing her to convince me to let them stay in the house. She said that she understood that she made mistakes and asked if I would let her stay in the basement if she agreed to pay rent. Now, I'm not a monster. I told her that she should have just been honest with me in the first place. I told her that she could move in whenever she wanted to and that she wouldn't have to pay rent. I did make it clear that this was a temporary arrangement and she would have to start looking for a job or think about going back to college, and she promised that she would get back on her feet soon and wouldn't be a bother. She is currently living with a friend and is supposed to move in soon. I hope things will be all right between the two of us because I know that's what her mom would have wanted. I'm still skeptical though, and I have made it clear that she has to be honest with me and be responsible with her money and pay rent every month. Update 4. It has been 2 months since my stepdaughter moved, and I'm happy to say that things have been going well. Things are still a little awkward between the two of us, but at least it is cordial instead of tense. It gives me a lot of peace to think that this is what my wife would have wanted. The kid has also been excellent with paying rent on time and is even thinking of going back to college and finishing her degree. I'm happy to see her doing well and staying out of trouble. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.